As I say, I was born in South East London, and then as we grew up, like a lot of families, we migrated out a little bit, sort of South East London, North Kent borders. Went to school in Sidcup, sort of Bexley Borough, London Borough, Bexley. Typical sort of working class family, really. Mum, dad, sister, etc., etc. Probably wasn't the most academic in a sense. I played all sports quite badly. I didn't necessarily play any of them that well, but I had a real passion for sport.
Was that a family trait then, in terms of sporty family, or was it more something that
Yes and no.
just natural?
Enough. My dad was one of those weird. He was unusual in the sporting sense. Certainly, so I was going to school in the 80s and 90s, and my dad was. I was born in the early 70s. My dad was council estate in Peckham, and he played rugby, which is quite unusual, you know. So, and he wasn't really into football. So I didn't come from a football family, but I grew up in a big football area, and all my friends were into football. So I didn't have that family. You're going to support this team. You're going to support that team. So my dad played rugby. He was a big cyclist. So I suppose yes, in terms of activity.
From Coordinate Sports, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders, and experts, and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest this episode is Matt Parish, CEO of the Liverpool FC Foundation. Matt is at the forefront of football for development, leading the foundation for the current Premier League champion. He initially started out in teaching before moving into community sports development and going on to work with two of the largest foundations in the UK. During the episode, Matt walks us through his philosophy for community engagement and past experience of the power of the club to engage with diverse local communities. We also dig into the challenges of the pandemic and his future plans for the Liverpool FC Foundation. Enjoy the show. Okay, so really excited to have Matt Parrish with us today. He's the Chief Exec of Liverpool FC Foundation, and Matt leads the team at the charity in its mission to create life-changing opportunities for children and young people. Welcome to the Drive Phase podcast, Matt.
Hi, James. Thanks for having us. It's saying I know this is only a podcast. You can't see it, but I'm glad as I said, just hurriedly changed my background there, realising that you're looking at undecorated walls. So, no, thanks for having us. Good to be here.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, same as me in the home office. I mean, when we normally start, give people a bit of insight on you and get to know you a little bit better, and we'll get into kind of your career through sport. But in terms of where we start, born and raised South East London, and it's for us, it's kind of started to be a theme. We've had like quite a few guests, successful entrepreneurs and leaders coming out of the South East London area. So I don't know if that's a theme, but how was growing up for you? What was that look like?
As I say, I was born in South East London, and then as we grew up, like a lot of families, we migrated out a little bit, sort of South East London, North Kent borders. Went to school in Sidcup, sort of Bexley Borough, London Borough, Bexley. Typical sort of working class family, really. Mum, dad, sister, etc., etc. Probably wasn't the most academic in a sense. I played all sports quite badly. I didn't necessarily play any of them that well, but I had a real passion for sport.
Was that a family trait then, in terms of sporty family, or was it more something that?
Yes and no. My dad was one of those weird. He was unusual in the sporting sense. Certainly, so I was going to school in the 80s and 90s, and I was born in the early 70s. My dad was council estate in Peckham, and he played rugby, which is quite unusual, you know. So, and he wasn't really into football. So I didn't come from a football family, but I grew up in a big football area, and all my friends were into football. So I didn't have that family. You're going to support this team. You're going to support that team. So my dad played rugby. He was a big cyclist. So I suppose yes, in terms of activity, he was
a bit more open-minded, really, than than a lot of families.
Yeah, and so he didn't push me into, you've got to be. I mean, my local clubs growing up would have been Millwall, Charlton, and West Ham over the river. And I ended up being a West Ham fan just by chance because my friends were. Because as I say, because I didn't come from a football family, as it were. And one of my friends' dads had played for West Ham but supported Charlton because he was a Woolwich boy. He was a local lad. So we used to go and watch both West Ham and Charlton, and got into playing football. In a way, and I went to a school. I often say to people, it was a secondary modern. I don't think secondary moderns exist anymore, but it's like, I always describe it. It's like a comprehensive, but without the sixth form. So it's in education, all boys school, but a real strong sports school. And I think in some respects, sport got me. I suppose sport did get me through school. Sport was my youth club. Sport was and I think the same. Playing Sunday football, Saturday football. And managed to play football at a reasonable standard. Wasn't good enough to play professionally. Sort of thought I was probably at one point, but wasn't good enough to play professionally. I mean, I still carried on playing until I was in my early 40s. And I think I learned so much from that, the social side of sport. A lot of the friends now that I played Sunday football with and went to school, I'm still friends with now. Some of them live, I've got one of my mates who's a PE teacher in China, another one, but we're still in contact, and sport was that hook and that.
Building that community, I guess, especially when you said about school maybe not being as academic through school. I guess a lot of people who didn't have that interest in sport might have drifted, maybe not have that such a community to. You seem like you enjoy school, but maybe if sport wasn't there, it might not have been the same.
And I think Don't get me wrong, I live in Liverpool. I live in Merseyside, so it's a brilliant place to live. It's a brilliant place to bring up the kids. I know we're going to come on to it. I've been lucky enough to work in East Lancashire and Burnley as well. And coming from South East London, I think people would say the same for every area, but I think every area, all of those areas have a real passion and identity about the people. I think you alluded to people from South East London, we're quite proud. I'm proud to call sort of South East London my home in the sense where I was from. Liverpool's my home now, but I'm quite proud to come from there. I was exposed to diversity from an early age, which is brilliant. And I learned even more I think, about inclusivity through sport, through playing sport. You know, I played for a variety of different, mainly football teams. Played a bit of rugby as well, but mainly football. Only because my dad probably wanted me to. Played a bit of football as well. And I really feel like a lot of so many lessons and things I take into my everyday life personally, but certainly in terms of work and from a leadership perspective, I feel like I have learned from sport and football. And some of that was learning what not to do. But also learning what to do, learning from some really great people. But you're right, and I think I was fortunate enough to go on to college and university more by accident than design in some respects. But
Because you went into teaching, PE teaching, right?
yeah, I didn't do particularly well. I was probably predicted to do okay. I didn't do particularly well in my GCSEs, probably just did enough. And looking back now, I know why. Unfortunately, I was sidetracked by sort of sport and other things, probably a bit too much. But did okay, went down more of a vocational BTEC route, went to university, trained as a PE teacher. And again, sport was being part of the football club and the sports teams at uni was again another reason for me. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it, but I probably wasn't a natural academic student. I wasn't a bad student, but I wasn't a natural academic. But I think that again, that whole sport, from a social perspective, participation, that kept me on track in uni as well.
Was that a big, I might be wrong, but in terms of we were describing your background, was that a big step for you to go to university then? Like in terms of generationally, was that something that's always been in your family? Or was that you the first one? Or?
It's an interesting one, really. Funny enough, I was thinking about this the other day. My mum, she went to university as a mature student. So I was probably the first, myself and my sister both, because we went to school in sort of North Kent, London Borough of Bexley, but North Kent. It was the grammar school system there, 11 plus system. Both of us, and I didn't pass my 11 plus. So I went and in a sense, that university option wasn't necessarily the obvious one. Most of my friends that I grew up with and went to school with didn't go to university. Certainly one of the first in my peer group, and I'm the oldest of two kids. My sister then did go to university as well. She ended up being she is a primary school teacher. So, but it was a big jump. And, you know, and I'll be honest, my dad wasn't that. He felt, not you got to go out and work some, but I certainly wasn't pushed down that route. If anything, I was encouraged to look at work and other options. So, and I probably several times through that journey at university, because I did a teaching degree, which is a BEd honours, which is a 4-year degree. And at several points during that time, I possibly, again, it's a bit of a theme here, if I haven't been involved in sport and participation in it so strongly, I may have dropped out, I may have drifted away.
That's what I was thinking in terms of moving forward. If your peer group wasn't, obviously now it's swinging back and forth. Like when I was growing up, we kind of generally encouraged to go to university. It was a big thing. Everyone should be going to uni. And then maybe now with the tuition fees, it's slightly different. People looking at other options. But going to uni with your peer group not attending, if you're a bit the outlier, I guess having that community to latch onto at uni might have helped you stay there and see it through.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think it's fair to say that I went to uni to do a sports degree. And I think there's a sports degree, so I would have started uni in 1990, 1991 or two, maybe, no, 93, 94. So, but 20 odd years ago, I'm trying to do myself a favour there, I think.
Yeah, they'll go 20 years.
Yeah, so, but it was a diverse group in terms of, I would have said, in terms of, if you like, socio-economic background. I think that because it was a sports course, it was a university that there was a lot of people joining through clearing. So there was some older students, which I think again added value. There was a really diverse students. I think from the perspective of my peer group, my friends growing up, because I ended up going to university locally, to be honest, for economic reasons, not in a sad story way, but just that my mum and dad had split up, and financially it was a big leap to go away to uni. So I went to university locally, so I still kept the same friendship group, so I had the best of both. In a sense, after a while, they blended. So a lot of the lads, especially that had come down to London to go to university, played football teams with my local mates. So that was blended. Some of them were mates as a result. So yeah, I think it was a loop, but sport was definitely the theme, that the constant for me that kept me engaged, if you were. That's why I feel I'm so, I suppose, fortunate to do it for a living, although it's not sport day in, day out, to be able to be involved in the sports sector.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of, so coming out of uni, did you go straight into teaching, and was that local?
Yeah, so I think I was looking at, so qualified as a PE teacher, looking at various jobs, and I sort of basically did a bit of permanent supply, I think, until the way the old teaching degrees used to work, it's probably changed since. Once you've done your final teaching practice, I think you started your final academic year and you went straight into a school. You did teaching practice every year, but you went straight into a school and you did a whole term basically. And I think by the time you finished that and you signed off, you got your qualified teacher status from memory. I might not have all the facts, you might get someone listening to this, but you got your qualified teacher status. You didn't get your honours degree until you finished your dissertation and all your exams. So you were able to do some supply, sort of, if you like, the January onwards and combine it with your studies, which was great. A, it was great financially, but B, great as experience. And I was doing that. I was also, during my time from sort of playing and uni, I'd done what was then the FA Prelim coaching badge. I think it's now called the FA Level 2, or your A for B Part 1, but it's a Level 2 in scale. I'd passed that, and I'd started doing some coaching for Charlton. So then when I graduated, I went for a job initially in the summer straight away. I hadn't talked and didn't get it as I think it's assistant football and community officer at Charlton. So I'd gone from coaching from part-time, job came up, and I got down to the last two. The guy got it, great guy. Anyway, cut us short, he ended up not staying there that long. So by the start of the academic year, the September, October of that year, 97, he'd moved on, opportunity came up again. I started full-time at Charlton.
I should say, so Charlton at that time, football in the community, that was, I guess, early days of the football in the community, I guess, sector, if you like, or setup. And were you, I guess back then, were you part of the actual club setup? Because I know obviously now, predominantly it's a charitable organisation linked to a club, but back then was it directly through the club? Or?
Yeah, it was half and half. It was the club and the PFA, the Professional Footballers Association. So what they did is we were set up as, certainly Charlton were, and most of the football community programs were, I think, were set up as not-for-profits. I think football community had started in some of the clubs in the Northwest. I think the Charlton Trust had started in about 92, 93. So I joined there in 97. I think there was 3 of us full-time. So yes, it was a not-for-profit. So all the money was invested back into the program, but it wasn't, as you say, it wasn't a registered charity. Very few, actually, if any, of the community programs were registered charities. I think, from memory, the first in the southeast to do so were Leyton Orient and Colchester United. I can remember they went charitable status, or went for charitable status quite early. Now, I think pretty much all are. But it was quite a traditional. It was a football-led community. It was.
What did the program look like back then? Obviously, you're going to get onto the Liverpool program and the scale of operation you're leading now. But what did it look like back then?
Well, the Charlton program was, as a lot of the football and community programs were then, it was balls, bibs and cones. It was football, it was holiday courses, it was after schools clubs, it was programs at leisure centres, etc. I think what we had a combination. But the interesting thing, because if you think of our patch, we had, I think, as I say, I started there, it was back in the 97, and the club then got promoted on the playoffs, that famous best ever playoff game, which was against Sunderland, that end of that season. So, which was semi-unexpected. There is a link there. In my first season, all clubs I've worked at, they've won stuff, so it must be me. So they got promoted, albeit only this. But that really set us in good stead. We really kicked on, and we were a little bit untapped. So we had 2 London boroughs, Greenwich and Bexley, which we worked primarily in, and then a lot of Kent. So Gillingham did a bit in Kent, and some of the other London clubs did. But Kent's massive. I think, from memory, the club got relegated and went straight back up again, but had 8-10 years in the Premier League. Pre the money and funding through PLCF, which is now the Premier League Charitable Fund, but there was still but more about the recognition, the scope. We really just kicked on during those periods. There's a lot of hard work. We had a lot of good staff. We grew and grew. I think but what was really interesting is I think we were probably, as I think a lot of the clubs based most in the urban areas were ourselves, Leyton Orient, Millwall, and others, West Ham. We were doing work on estates using football as a diversionary tool, as a use of pre-kicks, and pre-kicks has been one of the best Premier League programs and still going. It still is. It's unbelievable offer, and it's got an unbelievable history. But we were well placed when that sort of funding started to come in. So we used to get, SRB money and local authority money, and I remember us running a midnight, one of the first to run a midnight league, diversionary league, so it really did evolve. And we had a full-time social inclusion officer, who's also a colleague of mine. I've been at university with him. He was a semi-pro footballer and a PE teacher locally. He joined us, full-time social inclusion officer. So I think what we also did, coming from the teaching, we were coming from football from a professional background, we probably brought in a rigour and a professionalism, and because of the sort of teaching background and the standard. I'm not saying it was better, but it was different. So that combined with the football world and the guy that's now still chief executive of Charlton, Jason, he was from the sports development background. So that combination, we had a couple of ex-players from Charlton working for us, Bob Boulder, who also played for Liverpool, funny enough, Colin Walsh, there's a few others in that era. We had that real good mix, football, sports development, teaching and education. So it was a real potent mix for the sort of work we did.
Yeah, I guess at the very start, is there any link with, I guess, growing a fan base as well, like getting out in the community and looking for, I guess, the next generation of fans? Probably not have that challenge with Liverpool now.
It's different. There is some parallels, but it is different. You're right, 100%. I think the Charlton, I could comfortably say when we started the Charlton program, we run loads, and I mean a huge holiday camp program. We'd be working with, used to run something like 100-odd holiday program courses a week and all that sort of stuff across South East London and Kent. But you're right, in the early days, pre-Premier League, as we sort of we didn't get many kids on there with Charlton shirts, and as it grew, Premier League for 10 years, you had more and more Charlton shirts. That probably waned a bit towards the back end of my time there with sort of the dropping down to League One, Championship League One. There was a connect, but I think with Charlton is interesting. It was a bit more about connecting back with a historic fan base. If you think the old Valley was one of the biggest grounds in the country. The new Valley is built inside it. I don't know if you've ever been to the Valley, but the current Valley is built inside the old Valley. You can see the old turnstiles of the steps in. It was, I think I'm right in saying it had one of the highest ever attendances it wasn't for a football game, it's for a Who concert, but it had one of the, but it used to be, but back in the day, you'd get the older supporters telling you about when they go to games at the Valley and you'd be talking 60, 70,000.
So you're trying to tap back into that, I guess,
But what you had the South East London population expansion and overspill into Kent, generally down into Kent. In the same way West Ham fans sort of migrate out to Essex, don't they? And Charlton fans sort of migrated out to Kent, there's that corridor. You would find that mum, dad, grandma, granddad might be Charlton fans, and the kids had lost that connection. The club were really clever. The club ran Valley Express, so you could get, I think it was something like 70 different pickups from across the whole of Kent. Didn't necessarily go around damn well with some of the other clubs doing and stuff at the time, but when they were in the Premier League, Valley Express was a pickup. I think you could get return coach to the Valley for £5, and then you play and you watch the football. So they used to regulate 27,000 used to sell out every game at Charlton. And I think what the club cleverly latched onto is the work we were doing in the community. That not everyone who was coming would be a Charlton fan, but you could get good value season tickets and you could watch Premier League football. You could watch Liverpool, you could watch Man U, so the captains that. And it really early on, they were really, really robust. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't perfect, but really, really robust around safe, family, appropriate atmosphere. Bad language out, any racism out, early on. And I know some clubs have suffered with that. Don't get me wrong, it did happen, but they were really robust on it. So families felt safe. Different and other minority groups felt safe. We did a lot of work in Greenwich, and we bring in ensuring that the community, the fan base on a Saturday afternoon was representative of the community certainly around.
I don't think that's a good point. I guess because you could be doing all the great work in the community with all the diverse backgrounds or minority groups, but then if they didn't feel comfortable coming to a game, I guess it'll break down. So yeah, we're having that connected up sounds like
Yeah, and we also had, in Greenwich, you had the murder of Stephen Lawrence. There was a couple of other racist, certainly attacks, possibly murders, I think, in and around the same time. The Stephen Lawrence murder was very high profile, incredibly challenging for that community. But what the council did is they said, right, who's not going anywhere? We're not going anywhere, the council. The football club aren't going anywhere. I think we had our moments, we might, needed it, but the football club aren't going anywhere. Let's work together. And they created what was called the Care Partnership at the time. It was one of the first sort of, anti-racism. So it's the Charlton Athletic Race Equality Partnership. And that was about making sure that the club was representative of the community in which it was based. And it works hand in hand with the police, SDB, etc., etc. So I think that was key. I think over time, the Care Partnership moved from the council to the club. So the community programme is still part of the community trust at Charlton.
What was that like being around, I guess, talking about Stephen Lawrence murder, things like that, huge incidents in the community. What was that like? Obviously, you're working with to feel what it felt like to be there at the time.
It was pre me being at Charlton. I think I'm right in saying, and I might get the date slightly wrong, that Stephen would be in and around my age. So I think if that hadn't happened, he'd be getting on for his late 40s now. So I think I was a similar age to him when it happened. My wife, she actually taught in the school Stephen went to, Blackheath Blue Coat School, South East London. But it was very, very present in that community. The guys that were at the time alleged to have done it, but, they were visible in some sections, in some parts of the community. It was very, very present. I think the community and community groups and certainly the football club and the council, but they stepped up and they recognised it and they wanted to make a change. But it was, the football club that I played at for a long period of time was on the Thames Poly ground. It was the university ran over it. That was probably less than a mile from where Stephen Lawrence was murdered. So it was very, very present in that community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking in terms of your community delivery, you've got to be mindful of that. And
Definitely. I think the good thing and I think it's partly because of the work that we did and others did, but also partly because of just the history of the club, that Charlton wasn't perceived, and don't be wrong, I'm naive at its elements, but Charlton wasn't perceived as a club that had a connection to one part of the community. So it wasn't seen as only, I never got the sense it was seen as only being a white club or what, I think it was always seen as a welcoming family community club where everyone was welcome. And as I say, don't be wrong, unfortunately, incidents would have happened, but the club was really always focused on driving that and making sure it's a real community club. And Stephen Lawrence's murder and other incidents were part of that, recognise. And let's not forget, you alluded to it at the top, James, about South East London and some of the talent that's come that has, and I'm not trying to profess that I include myself in that talent, but some of the talent that has and does come out of South East London, when the Royal Arsenal closed in Woolwich, that was the equivalent, I think, of, I've heard someone say it was the equivalent of several collieries closing. That was everyone in that little part that worked at the Arsenal. So when that went, and there was we almost had, we did have postcode segregation in the sense that kids from certain postcodes didn't think, they could see Canary Wharf, but trying to encourage them that it's for them was sometimes a challenge. And that was what I think we focused a lot on as a community program there. It was about, giving kids self-belief, confidence, raising aspirations. It is for you. If you want it, don't have to be. You can see it, you can touch it, go and get it.
I was going to say that grounding. I guess you've been able to. Not everyone's going to have that. I guess that exposure and that experience when they're starting out or working in their career. But I guess that's really helped you to obviously move north and move to Burnley initially. That's really helped you in other areas.
Yeah, and like I said, we grew. So we fast forward, whatever it was. I was at Charlton for commission to run the University Youth Services in Greenwich, targeted youth services. And that was my point. I think what we did really well is we made the evolution from a balls, bibs and cones football provider to a wider, sports development, youth services, targeted youth services, services for disabled young people. We ran an independent school which supported young people that were affected by antisocial behaviour and crime. Really some really sort of expansive stuff down into Kent. At one point, working with all the different authorities in Kent, we were supporting about 12,000 kids a week on positive activity programs across the county. So we did.
But that wouldn't have been possible unless you were like that. Unless you had that reputation you did have of being an open club, right? Because you got a lot more conflict going in.
Yeah, and it's one that was built on trust and built up over time. And we found ourselves going into this whole new world of going into commissioning and being up against the big beasts of commissioning, and contract service provider organisations, and that was that. So we did that, and I think to your point, and then moving to Burnley, East Lancashire is a very different place. Demographics are very different for the start. Very sort of white working class community with a significant South Asian heritage community, and the football club is the thing with Burnley. The football club is so present in that town. It really is at the centre of that town. It's a small town. I think Burnley itself, although we worked in Burnley and Pendle, Burnley itself, I think it's a population of 80,000, and the ground, the Premier League club, I think holds about 22, 23,000. So it's quite a sizable. Clearly not everyone going to the game is local, but I don't think I ever went to a meeting I was there for about 2.5 years. I don't think I ever went to a meeting. Doesn't matter what level the meeting was. In 2.5 years, there wasn't one Burnley season ticket holder at least in the room.
What was the reason for moving north? Was it just an opportunity that came up, or did you?
It was a combination of factors, really. My wife's family in the north. My wife's from Ireland, family in the north. My wife was a deputy head teacher, secondary school deputy head teacher in South East London, and then in Kent. And she was working full time. We had kids, I suppose, relatively late. We were both we had our first child when we had a son when we were both 41, 42. And we just thought, right, actually, she was working full tilt, I was working full tilt, and are we able to get closer to her family, etc., etc. And also an opportunity thing. I think from the point of view of what I was able to do, so what my portfolio was at Cheltenham. So I said earlier, by the time I left and what we were doing, we structured and we had the titles where the chief exec, and I was chief operating officer, and almost in a good way to keep me, the trustees and the chief exec said, look, you run it. They let me run it. And I'm not saying he was a figurehead and he did nothing, but his role was to go out and create partnerships, commercial partnerships. My role was to run it and do that side of it. I was challenged all the time in terms of professionally, I suppose personally, it was rewarding. We were one of the biggest charities in the sector, so I was probably rewarded consummate to that. So therefore, it made it quite hard to move and stay where we were because of the mortgages in the southeast of England can sometimes be quite intimidating, can't they? Property prices. So I think it was just a lot of factors. I just needed a new challenge. I had looked at other jobs and applied for other jobs and not got them. Sometimes down to me, sometimes down to perhaps a variety of reasons. But the Burnley job came up. I knew the guy that had gone up to restart the community program at Burnley. It had gone bust, I suppose, from a better term, several years before. And the guy that had got the job to sort of head it up, he had done the same job that I did at Charlton at Watford. And a couple of opportunities had come up, but as it grew, and the opportunity go up, contacted him, went through a process. But got the job. It was a big move, moving up in things. We had a 1-year-old at the time, moving north. My wife stopped work. Okay, her family were up there, so we moved. But although working in Burnley, we lived in Merseyside, so we moved to Merseyside, and I was commuting across. Loved it. A town and East Lancashire and a region that's got its challenges, but loves its football club.
Yeah, a bit of synergy with Charlton, really, I suppose. If they got up into the Premier League, stayed there for a good amount of time.
Yeah, lots of
got slightly similar. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only difference, and you touched on it, is there was still a bit about fan engagement, but not as much because what's really it sticks in my head, and I'll get this wrong, James. So it sounds like a bad story, but the actual principle is right. I remember going up for one of my interviews, driving up and coming off, and you go up M6, I think, and M65 toward Burnley. And one of the signs, it was something like Manchester, Leeds, Wigan, Blackburn, Burnley, Bolton. And I thought, bloody hell, they're all football clubs. And there's a lot of football clubs in a reasonably small area geographically, but the town and the support was quite. So Burnley, I'm simplifying for effect, but everyone in the town supports Burnley. Blackburn, everyone in the town supports Blackburn. Whereas obviously South East London is like this homogenous lump, isn't it? So there's people move around London, move in from all over the country and across the world for work and family, different reasons. Whereas Burnley is different. There hasn't been it's obviously there's been when the industry went, some of the industries went, it's been, that's changing, there's lots of new industry there now. But the football club was certainly one of the big players in the town, and it was also a community program that had been at a low base from being really high back in the early days of football community, a low base, but was on the up. So it was really exciting. A working class town that loved its football, but a good, a town with a heart. It's a proper football town. We were doing lots of work, around the representation again in fans that do working with the South Asian community there and trying to, encourage that the football club was a safe place and was a safe. Again, on our community programs, it was a representative, but working on that with the club, loved it, really enjoyed it. And I was just sort of the number two again, so it was almost a sideways move in a sense in terms of responsibility. Opportunity came up at Liverpool, quite a long and robust process. And I think it was 5 or 6 interviews, various different interviews.
I was going to say, we were speaking before the recording earlier, just about when I looked at that, I saw that you'd worked Charlton's a really big setup. Burnley, to my knowledge, is one of the biggest setups as well. A lot of stuff, a lot of impact going on. And then I guess Liverpool's one of the biggest brands. So was that something that drew you to obviously living on Merseyside, or was it a connection with your wife's family? They're all Liverpool fans as well?
Not the Liverpool fans piece in the family. I won't try and say I'm born. Growing up, like I said, I was born in late '73, almost bang at the end of '73, December 1973. So growing up watching football, '70s, '80s, '90s, Liverpool, one of the biggest teams. There was Liverpool fans in my class because Liverpool were the top team. People like Sir Kenny Dalglish and Ian Rush and etc. So Liverpool was a big part of the football life, wasn't it? In that era, it is one of the biggest clubs in the world anyway. I think so. A combination of that, I think the opportunity to do what I'd done for a living for the last 20 years at one of the, I don't know what the metrics are, but one of the top 6 clubs in the world, let alone in the Premier League. When you come to it, and it sounds like a cliche, and I'm conscious that I'm not from here, so I don't want to, use cliches, but football is such a thing. It's so big on Merseyside, and I always say to people about the Heathers, and other colleagues will be bored of me saying this because I always use the example. But the taxi driver test, if you get off the train at Lime Street and you get in a taxi, I guarantee you the taxi driver will ask you within 2 or 3 sentences whether you're a blue or a red. And I think that just that opportunity, we were, as a foundation, we're probably a bit undercooked, little bit of a sleeping giant. We were doing some great stuff, not talking about it enough, possibly not doing enough.
Well, that's what I was interested in, because obviously our operation was all about impact, etc. And I guess coming into the role, you've got a massive opportunity to make a big impact. Like, Liverpool's probably one of the most deprived areas in the UK, probably, if not it is.
I think,
And then you've got one of the biggest footballing brands coming together.
yeah, as a city region, the exciting and interesting thing, and it also poses challenges. As a city region, it is the most deprived, but it's a region that's full of unbelievable people, unbelievable opportunity. We've got two of the biggest clubs. It's not even in the same region. We're across apart from each other. Everton do some unbelievable work in the community. They've got a rich history of it, and still, it's not a history, they still do. But there's so much need and so many people that need support and value support with their football club. So there's Tranmere as well, obviously Merseyside. But yeah, all of that coupled with the fact Liverpool has got that true global footprint. So they use the term at the club of local heart and global pulse. And I think that's so true. It's something like 300. It's actually gone up. I was just saying it's 306, but I think there's another 10 have joined official Liverpool sports clubs around the world. So there's about just shy of 320 official Liverpool sports clubs around the world. I was fortunate enough to go on the club pre-season tour to the US. What Liverpool Football Club does really well is when the club go on tour, the club goes. It's not just a game. They don't just go and play a game and go. We deliver community work. There's fan activation events. So I was fortunate enough to go on that and to see the passion of the fans that are, we had fans travelling. We went to Notre Dame Uni on that campus there, South Bend, and we did a camp, and a couple of guys on the driven with their Liverpool fans had driven something like 10, 12 hours. And I said, "Oh, you must be coming to the game. Going to the game as well." And then, no, they'd driven just to come to the camp. I thought it must have been quite underwhelming to get out of their car after 12 hours and meet me. But that passion, some of those fans will never, some would have done, but some will never get the opportunity to go to Anfield, but they passionately feel part of that. And, there was a fan event in Boston in a music venue, and I think it was about 3,000 or 4,000 capacity, sold out, packed, singing Jamie Webster songs. And so that passion, and so we are the official charity of and our home is here on Merseyside, but we international club as well, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. So we work in trying to service that local need, and also fans, and working with fans and communities in need around the world is part of what we do.
So in terms of, I guess, the scale of operations, like obviously you've got talked about there being a global brand, love that saying as well, local heart, global pulse. In terms of your day-to-day foundation operations or foundation programs, what's the scale in terms of like the number of programs you're in, participants engaging with?
It's at the moment we run just over 30 different programs. There's two parts to the community work of the football club. So there's the foundation, and then there's the Red Neighbours. So Red Neighbours is basically the club's in-house CSR team, and that's about focusing on the areas basically around the football homes. So around the stadium and around Kirby training ground, and that's about sort of local needs. So they focus on food poverty, older populations, social isolation, etc. The foundation, and it's a small team. I think it's 3 or 4 staff, and some part-time staff, 4 staff and some part-time staff. The foundation is sort of mainly Liverpool City region, as I said, wide. We're around 60 full-time staff now. As I say, 30 different programs. We operate at the moment under skills, wellbeing, and health, but that will range from mental health support programs in schools for young people, the Kickstart program, Premier League Kicks, Premier League funded programs, Kicks, Primary Stars, Inspires. So a full range, as we said. We just changed our focus slightly. It was children and young people. It's now young people and families. So we're opening our scope slightly, because we've always worked with some different groups outside of the young people space. We've always done some work with military veterans. We've always done work with older people with disabilities. So we widen our scope slightly, but I think we're trying to remain focused, because there's a danger, especially with the size of the club, you can try and be all things to all people.
Yeah, you must be getting offered opportunities or seeing opportunities all the time, I guess, to get involved with.
Yeah, and as you said, with your focus, you guys on impact, I think that's crucial. I think one of the challenges now, I've been here almost exactly 2 years, 12 months of which have been living like this in the sort of the pandemic world. So it's been a bit unusual, but we've made some great strides. We were definitely about to kick on in my second year, and I think we still have, despite what.
That was actually going to be one of my questions in terms of, obviously recently appointed as chief exec. Do you have, and I know it's probably changed over the last 18 months or so, or last year, did you have I guess, coming into the role of chief exec, have you got a plan like your first 100 days, or you've planned for this new strategy in your role? You've got something for the foundation to move forward?
It's a good question. I think I feel generally, I don't know your view is that whilst this pandemic hasn't gone anywhere, what it has created is there's even more need, if that's the case, than there was before, nationally, probably internationally, but certainly in our region. I think there's need for ourselves and organisations such as us to do more. If you wanted to know my plan, I think what we have to do, and as I was sort of saying there, is ensuring that we focus on the areas where we can have most impact. Key for me, I think we'll have done, we've been doing this last season, our first full impact report. We've in the past talked about numbers engaged, but we focused on the impact, what's the outcomes, so we'll be looking to do that alongside the club in the summer to release that. So I think in a way, managing our growth, and there will be more growth, but retaining focus, that's my biggest target and also challenge, if that makes sense.
What would you challenge? We normally ask about, I guess, funding and stuff. It probably might be a misconception with you being the foundation linked to the club, and people outside of the sector might think, well, linked to Liverpool, Premier League, loads of money, it's easy, you like limitless funds essentially for what you're doing. How does it tend to work though? I'm assuming it's not like that at all. You're going to have to work for it.
No, it's a separate legal entity. We're self-financing. We get incredible support. Our trustees, both independent and club trustees, we get incredible support from the club. I think the in-kind contribution, there's an in-kind contribution, if you like, in our account, but we get, legal support and HR, housing in terms of office space, PR support, et cetera, et cetera. We get incredible support. That's not uncommon. Make up for all of the football club charities, but arguably, I think we get, because of the size of the club, we get a real depth of support there. The one area that's been challenged for us, our turnover income was impacted last year as the pandemic hit, because our fundraising, we are very fortunate to be able to run big fundraising events. We've had an annual Legends game at Anfield for the last 4 or 5 years, and the last couple of years that's sold out. So 2 weeks into my role, when I started in March 19, we played AC Milan at Anfield, to a sold-out stadium, and that netted us as a foundation about around £1 million, which enabled us to fund some of our own programs to support other charities. We were due to play Barcelona was it this weekend? Almost March, last weekend in March last year, 2020. Obviously, that was cancelled. So we have had an impact on our fundraising. So our turnover last financial year, last season, if you like, ended up being just over £1 million behind where we expected. So that was obviously impact. However, this year, we're going to be back to where we expect it to be. It will be probably our highest ever turnover, but a lot of that is restricted income. So the need and grants and etc. we've been really successful at delivering more work. But the challenge for every charity is that restricted and unrestricted income.
Yeah, are you able to expand on that a bit in terms of that, what it means to be restricted and unrestricted?
Yes, I suppose it's more nuanced than this, but basically restricted income is the money you get through grants and or commissioning to run specific programs. So when you grant application, you say you're going to do A, B and C, and you have to spend the money on A, B and C. Unrestricted income is money that is fundraised and is sort of free money. It still has to be spent. It's not like a business where it's profit and goes to shareholders. It has to be spent on the charitable purposes of the organisation. But it's free for you to be more creative with. Pay, every charity has to pay as running costs. What we try and do though a lot is we try and I'll make it even more complicated. Some of our unrestricted income, we make it, and that's often generated through fundraising, donations, sometimes sponsorship in the sort of our world that's changing, but we tend to designate that. So we will say to donors want to know that they're not necessarily paying for the chief exec's salary. They want to know that.
So I'm going to fund this project or this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we donors, we had, hospitality, as an example, hospitality members at the club, when the games got cancelled or postponed, back end of last season when the first lockdown happened, some of those hospitality members donated to us what they would have spent for the last 4 games, if you like. But we said, look, these are going to be our focus areas in terms of fundraising, which was food poverty, mental health and employment. What do you want it to go towards? And that's what we've done. So if they said food poverty, we worked via Red Neighbours, we worked with St Andrew's Community Network, which is the North and South Liverpool food banks, and it went to help fund community pantries. We did the same for fans. So when the Legends game, eventually we had to cancel it. We postponed it initially and then cancelled it. We said to fans, you can have a full refund, or if you donate to us, it will be spent on this: food poverty, employability, mental health. And that's what we've done. We've split it, and the food poverty element we've donated to St Andrews to set up community pantry. So I think that's important. I think that's an important message for that reason, so that don't want their money going to.
The amount of programs is difficult to go into details for any of them, but in terms of the one I know you just launched recently, that's the Community Hubs program. And I've kind of seen the model slightly, and I might be wrong, similar type of model, but based out of schools. But these community hubs, are they based in schools, or are they right in like?
No, the old community. So you bang on there, James, I think. But so I know Manchester United, for instance, Manchester United Foundation.
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
They run a hub school model, which is about all of their school provision being based in schools. This is similar, but in a community setting. So it's basically, we feel quite passionately that we should look to work in partnership with others in the community, and then we bring all our respective best parts, like any good partnership, but we use the power of the Liverpool badge and what the foundation can do to uplift those partners as well. Because I think it's a danger if we go into the space and we're going to do it almost unilaterally, you can draw money away from others. There's so many great and brilliant community groups and organisations out in our community that we want to work with them where possible. So we were very, very strong in North Liverpool, and then sort of bits and pieces across the city region. So to sort of offer more across the city region, got funding via C. Morgan Foundation and DCMS, the Community Match Challenge. And then we've gone into partnership with doing more at our existing home, which is in North Liverpool, Anfield Sports Community Centre, and at 5 different community centres, so they're existing community youth or sports centres across the city region. We're going with them, so we'll be running more. We're helping them in terms of making a facility that we can run our programs from. So an obvious example, which is pretty constant with all 6, is we run a lot of employability programs. To do that, you need a classroom with the IT and with the et cetera, et cetera. So, but the great thing is the community centre gets to use that for their other groups as well. So
right, great. You're funding the fit out or whatnot, and then looking at
or buying the equipment. And in some centres, or most of the centres, it's about some new sports equipment that we use and other groups use. But really, it's about how can we work with those community groups? What's the needs in that area? So in one of the groups in Birkenhead, it's going to be lots of employability work. That's a focus for them. It's a need locally. In one of the other centres, it's more of a sports offer. So initially, the Tiber Centre in Toxteth, we're doing lots of sport there. There will be employability and there will be other programs as well, but sports can be. So we feel it's going to be different dependent. Well, not feel it will be different dependent. We're really, really excited about it. I mean, as I say, the funding. We've been talking to C. Morgan Foundation for a while, and then the Community Match Challenge opportunity by the DCMS came about to really kick it on and kickstart that. So what's exciting about it is we passionately saying we haven't just rehashed the project that was already happening. You know, we've had some money from C. Morgan Foundation, which has enabled us to expand our KICS program, our employability programs across the city region. We're looking to be delivering PE and sport in every SEND school in the Liverpool city region within the next year. But also the Hubs project, which is totally new. We worked to some degree with all of those hubs, but in some cases it was very ad hoc. Now we're going to have a timetable on each of the hubs, working with partner groups, etc. So it's really exciting.
So with everything that's going on, obviously you've got a long career there. And I don't know how day to day. I know you was in the operational roles previously. What do you feel like are the kind of recurring challenges? So a lot of moving parts, staff, programs running all over the area, like remote working. What's the kind of the biggest challenges that pop up in managing all that?
I think we touched upon it earlier, retaining focus, ensuring that you don't try and be all things to all people. You know, a football club in itself as a fan base, you know, it's a broad church, isn't it, as a fan base, but we can't work with everyone. So ensuring focus, not getting pulled into mission drift and suddenly trying to do all sorts of different things. Make sure you've got the right partnerships. Funding is always a key. You touched upon it, and that's varied at each club. There's been different needs at each club, but funding, the challenge of different types of funding. The challenge you touched upon there as well. I think it's changing, but sometimes that perception that if you're the charity of a football club, you're funded by the club. That's different at every club. Clearly, Charlton, Burnley, Liverpool, different clubs, but that's a challenge. And making sure we tell our story, and we tell it appropriately, measuring impact.
Yeah, that's it. I was going to say, the measurement of the impact on that. For us, obviously, as a software company, we're always interested in how organisations do that and how they use the data to drive decisions, or even how they're able to collect it. What type of role does that play for your decision making process?
It's new and growing. We were probably, like I said earlier, we were probably guilty in the past of just more about just counting the numbers. And I think we had really got good engagement, which is growing, and we've got good sustain and retention. So sort of participant groups, if you like, voting with their feet and staying. But now we need to start, as I say, look at what's the actual real social return on that, what's the impact. And then what we need to start doing is come back to the point about ensuring that, if we're running 33 programs, are all 33 really working? Have we got sort of deliverables, KPIs against them, and are they all working, or are we just always doing what we've always done? I think that will actually make us bigger, better and stronger, but most importantly, supporting more people in the best way we can. And if we're not best placed to support certain groups, maybe others are, and we focus more in another area or with another.
Yeah, to kind of helping you deploy the resources in the right place. Yeah, it's got a biggest impact, yeah.
Without a doubt, there will be programs we look at over the next 12 months. We say that's resource heavy, and the impact we're actually having. It might be resource heavy if it's really targeted. You might work with a small group, but it might be having massive impact on that small group. But also, you might have a program that's resource heavy and there's no real sustainable impact. We look at programs that ideally have got long-term sustainable impact and make long-term sustainable change. It's that come square the circle, if you like, back to where I think you started with, James, our strapline of creating life-changing opportunities for young people and families. And that's how we're trying to get better at focusing on that. Will this program do that? Will this program create life-changing, positive life-changing opportunities?
Yeah, it's difficult to, I guess, when you're doing the best work, it's before all those challenges happen. So you might be working with young children and they don't actually get into those areas where they might make the wrong decision or something like that because of the impact you've made before. But it's hard to measure that if it never actually materializes, right?
Yeah, and you're right. It's early intervention and prevention and cure. But I think you're probably working with young people that might have more indicators that they suggest they might be at risk, working with those groups, and then if less of those young people than were previously to end up, experiencing challenges, then that's how we measure that success, I think. But you're right, it's a challenge for the sector, isn't it? It's not easy.
Exactly. More about yourself, really. In terms of business leadership or organisational leadership, do you have any type of philosophies on leading the team? Obviously, now chief exec and obviously figurehead for the charity. Do you have anything that you've developed over time that you always deploy into your?
I actually quite like there's been lots of work on it, but some of the studies done on the All Blacks rugby sort of culture and that idea that, everyone, I think they say everyone sweeps the sheds, but everyone cleans the change.
Yeah, the 15 principles and all that stuff.
Yeah, so I like that. I believe in being visible, not being this chief executive who doesn't know who people are, but being visible. That I get when you're running a huge organisation, and I'm not, but a huge organisation, that's challenging. But being visible, if you like, leading from the front, where occasionally, if things go wrong, you've got to be the person that fronts it up. If things are going in the same way that you are when things go well, hopefully empowering others. What guy that Jason is the chief executive at Charlton, what he'd be the first to say if you interviewed him, what he was really, really good at. This isn't a sign of weakness as far as I'm concerned, is getting experts around him. So we got experts around him and he wasn't threatened by that. And I think that's key. And I think that, so doing that. So our financial controller, it's her job. She knows more about finance than I do. I've got an understanding of how it works. That's her job, isn't it? So getting experts around, empowering others, trying not to be a control freak. I sometimes trying not to, delegating and giving people their wings.
That's got to be the challenge, right? If you've come up through the development of all the foundations you worked with, I guess you don't know if you had a grand plan when you started to be a chief exec, or was it about working day in day out with the young people and as you move up, you're getting further away from that, right?
Yeah, and I think you'll find if you go into use the education sector, if you go into schools, quite often deputy heads, head teachers, chief execs are quite often there's a lot of ex-PE in there. That's sometimes because you probably get too old to leap around in shorts every day. But if you think fundamentally PE is what it's about, communication, organisation, which are so transferable to leadership. But you're right, I think, have I always wanted to be a chief exec? Not as such, but I've always wanted to lead a football club foundation because I genuinely have seen, I've witnessed, and I believe in the positive impact we can have. So I think, but you're right, I think what for me, because I've come up through the ranks, for want of a better term, I've done the coaching, I've been on the mugger ball court on a Friday night and all that sort of stuff. It probably gives me a credibility, but I have to that's a comfort zone. I have to ensure as a leader that I do both. I do both. I don't know if this sort of comes across well, but I think as the leader, you've got to be prepared to be on the balcony, but also be on the dance floor, haven't you? If you're all balcony and no understanding the dance floor, it doesn't work, but also vice versa.
I love that analogy. Do you have any like regular routines and things like habits, stuff like that, you to stay on top performance? What's a kind of normal daily routine look like for you?
It's all gone a bit strange in the last 12 months, I must admit. It's the daily routine. I think for everyone, some of the challenges of the modern world are, keeping on top of emails and stuff. That seems like a job in its own right. And trying to remain focused on it's about trying to make time and remain focused on the big picture, but not ignore it. That's the same thing about the balcony dance floor. And that's quite tough. That's been tougher, I think, in the last 12 months because the previous head of foundation, as was before me, had left a year before I started. I think the staff and the company needed a visible leader, so I had to be in the guts a bit. And I did that for 12 months, and I was starting to get to the point where I was stepping to the outside and away from it and empowering the team and itself, put a new sort of management structure in. Probably with the result of COVID, I had to get back into the guts of it again, but getting back to that. So as the leader, being able to be on the outside, let others run it, but step in, make sure you're across it. I certainly don't get that right all the time. I'm sure I get that wrong on a daily basis, but hopefully I'll get it right more than the times I get wrong. But I think, again, being prepared to listen to others, but occasionally accepting that as the senior role in any organisation, I suppose you're in that role to make decisions, aren't you? You make those decisions based on hopefully good judgment and experience. You won't always get them right, but if you make them coming from the right position, if that makes sense, and for the right reasons, you can justify that decision. Most people will respect it and listen to you.
Yeah, definitely. Just an observation for myself as well in terms of I always talk about like diversity and inequality and stuff. I mean, just looking at the leadership team in the foundations, I don't know whether it's common in football. Like I said, there's a lot of conversation about, but you've got like strong female leadership team, like quite a lot of in your positions there.
Yeah, I would say it's probably unique. I think it's one of the team did the stat, worked out the percentages. It can't be that hard to do. But it's something like 80% because it's an all. Our leadership team is a team of 5, I suppose, including me, and the other 4 are women. So
80% female leadership team, probably not too common in football.
No, it's probably pretty rare. I know foundations community programs are a bit different, but we've got certainly got a really good gender balance across the foundation and across the club to a degree, but certainly across the foundation. I think we need to work harder at wider diversity across the foundation, but we are focused on that. We are working on it. But yeah, we have got a strong female team, and there's a strong team. There's some strong personalities in that senior team, but that's good. There's it's a sort of cognitive diversity. I think a lot of organisations make the mistake of surrounding themselves by people that think, look, and sound like them. But then you end up with all coming out of the same thought. You need difference, don't you? You need difference of ideas, difference of background, difference of culture, different knowledge, different, to give that.
Exactly, or you're just going to stand still otherwise, right? Yeah.
And that to me is an obvious thing, and it so surprises me that. But every industry is the same, isn't it? Because you grow up in the industry, and I've probably been guilty of it. But that's certainly in our team. We've got that difference of opinion, difference of background, different, coming. And as I said, our financial controller is a finance expert. We've got head of marketing and business development. She's from a marketing background. We've got sports development, delivering the sports program, youth work experience. There's a real mix in there.
For me, last question for me. I'm conscious on time for you. So if you go back to mid-90s and give yourself a bit of advice before you started out in the industry and in your career, what would that piece of advice be if you were going to go back and give it to yourself?
It's a good question. I'll probably be, trust your instincts, trust your judgment, back yourself more early on. I was, don't get me wrong, I loved my time at Charlton. I probably stayed a bit too long. I think people now, certainly younger people, think nothing of moving jobs sort of more regularly. I think I'm 47, perhaps people were more, certainly my parents' generation, more used to being in one job for a long time, etc. So back yourself more, trust judgment. But I think, again, I've always worked hard, always operate with integrity, and be honest, communicate well. I'm trying to think if there's one goal. I can't think of a golden nugget, James. It's a great question. I should have pre-thought of that. It's a great question. But I think back yourself, trust your judgment, work hard. And one thing that I think the last 12 months is, and I'm going to be guilty of this with all Cam, is you have got to try and make time for yourself and your family, but ensure that your team do, your staff do, your colleagues, your peers, ensure that that's part of your culture, and hopefully it is here.
Definitely, yeah, definitely more important than ever now as well, I think, with what's going on. So, Matt, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for giving up that for us and all the insight.
Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.